up, YouTube? So remember I was just working on the Mach 1. Oh, by the way, 5-finger death punch for today. This song is I Apologize. Good song. So back to what I was working on the other day was the Mach 1 and the rear axle from Moser. Told you I had to replace the bearing on it, had issues, and blah, 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 blah. All right, so now I'm back to the TTSaleen. So I told you I had the exact same setup in this car with the Moser axles and all. So let me uncover this so you can see it. So this is what the end looks like. And if you'll notice, there's no seal pressed in here. This is one of the older designs, I guess, before they started putting a seal. They actually press a seal in here, and you got the bearing with the rubber O-ring. Well, with all of this maintenance I've been doing with the cars, I said, you know what, let me just check it again. So sure enough, that car has another leak on the same side. So I just pulled the axle out, and when I pulled it out, I could see where it's leaking from. I've already inspected the bearing, and the bearing is perfectly fine. Don't worry about this little light bead of silicone. I put a little light bead of silicone on the very outside edge of the bearing to the housing, just for like extra insurance, you know. But the bearing actually didn't crack, it's fine. If you look in here, it's actually really oily between the axle and the bearing itself. So that's where the leak's coming from. The leak's actually right in here. And what I did was I started turning this, and it doesn't turn very easily. It actually, right in here, I can feel a catch in it. So what's happened is this bearing has failed, and even though it's actually not making any noise that I can hear in the car, that bearing has failed. Not only does it not roll smoothly, but it's actually failed to the point that it's leaking. It's allowing fluid to leak out. So what we have to do now is I have to go in here and I have to take this, what we call the wedding ring. I have to pull that off and then pull the bearing off and replace the bearing. And I'm gonna get their seal, and I'm gonna tap their seal into the tube of the rear end housing. So once I do that, that's gonna prevent any fluid from getting past this point, so it won't leak anymore out here. And by putting a new bearing on it, that's gonna let the axle spin as freely as possible. So just a few more things. You always have to keep track of your car, whether it's your daily driver to work, so it's dependable, or your hot rod that makes a lot of power. Anytime you have a car that you're gonna go fast in, you wanna make sure all your equipment is working perfectly. And this comes up just because recently, I'm sure you've seen the video of this really nice red Mercury Comet that had the big blower on it, and the guy's brakes failed because his throttle was sticking. He was dragging the brakes to slow the car down, and he overheated the brakes and they failed, and he crashed his car. And it wasn't necessarily because he wasn't doing maintenance, and basically he had mechanical failure in some parts that didn't work quite right. It sucks. It sucks for him. He crashed a beautiful car. But what I'm trying to do is go back through all my stuff and just make sure not only the brakes are working properly, but there's no oil leaks, you know, everything is updated, the fluids are fresh, things like that. Just the normal maintenance that you do on a car, whether it's your daily driver, so it gets you to work every day so you can make a living, or it's your toy, so you go out here and you're beating on it, it doesn't lock up a bearing and put you in the ditch. You know, simple stuff like that. So anyway, I just wanted to show you a little bit of difference here between the 94 to 98 style setup and the 9904, which you can see in my Mach 1 video. So I have everything taken apart here. You know, when I told you, hey, you have the piece that goes on the end, this is how it looks, and you basically cut it to fit and things like that. It goes on here and holds your caliper bracket, which is here, and all that good stuff. But you'll see on here I've got AFCO shocks and coilovers, just nicer stuff. And you'll see my anti-roll bar, which goes under the rear end so I can have tailpipes on this car. Just a few things to show you behind the scenes when you have fast cars and you want to make sure they're 100% safe and everything's correct and right on them. And this is stuff that happens. I mean, I didn't even know I had a bearing going bad on it. I thought I just had a leak. But normally, sometimes the car's trying to tell you stuff, telling me I had a leak because I actually had a bad bearing. So the good news is I've got this fresh box from Moser. I'm gonna put that axle in the box. I'm gonna call them up Monday, tell them what I'm doing. I'm gonna send this back to them, have them update it with the new style bearing and wedding ring on it. While they got it, just check the axle for straightness and make sure everything's good to go, and have it back in about a week. So I'll finish up the video, putting it back together, and I'll hook some GoPros to the car and give you another ride along. Hopefully the last video I did with the Mach 1 driving along, you enjoyed that. Let me know if that's what you want to see more of instead of me running my mouth. All right, talk to you later. All right, quick update. Moser Engineering doesn't have my axle yet. It shipped out on Monday. Today's Tuesday. They should have it tomorrow, and they're going to be putting a new bearing on the axle for the TTSaleen here. But in the meantime, the seals showed up that I got, which basically are replacements for the Mach 1, which I didn't need because they were in good shape. What I want to show you is this is the new way of doing it if you don't have the bearing with the O-ring on it. So if I take this off, if you had the bearing with the O-ring, you'll notice there's no seal inside here, right? Well, basically this seal will go in place. I'll drive it into here and it'll fill in what you see right here in this ridge and this hole, and that'll go in there. So then when the axle goes back in, we won't need the bearing with the O-ring in it. The axle will slide in here, and that rubber will keep it from leaking any fluid past the axle. So I'm gonna pop this in here, and that'll fix the leak that I had. And then I'm just waiting for the axle to come back, and we'll be good to go. But hey, kudos for finding the leak through the bearing, which meant the bearing was bad. So now the TTSaleen will be back 100% and rolling smoother. And just like that, it's August 1st, and I've got a package back from Moser Engineering. Get it out of here. As you can see, it is my axle back, and they have installed a brand new bearing on it, and this should be my seal. All right, so for my particular housing, it is this seal. It's the 1.365 diameter, which fits in here, and I've just stuck it in there so you can see how it goes. It goes with the spring side toward the housing like this, so the smooth side goes to the outside, so it looks like that. And the way this works is, so here's your axle, this is the flange that goes toward the wheel, and the smooth side goes toward the flange. So the axle, it actually fits on here like this and slides in, and what happens, fluid is not supposed to penetrate past this rubber ring here, so that way fluid can get all down on the axle and get in here, but it will not leak past the bearing here. And because the bearing is sealed, it doesn't need to get any kind of fluid on its own, and we should be good to go. Now what the problem was before, I never had a seal here, so fluid could get all the way down to here, and if for some reason there was a problem and this ever cracked, this little O-ring here, it could leak out, which is what happened originally on this car. And this last time, the bearing actually failed. It was leaking between the bearing and the axle and leaking out down here. So I just had Moser replace this bearing. It's a brand new bearing on it. And now I've actually got a seal. So I'm about to press the seal into here. It's pretty straightforward, not really a big deal. I'm gonna put a little bit of stuff on here just to make it slide in a little easier. And then the trick to putting this in so you don't gack it up basically is you need to press evenly and flat. So what you do is you just get you a big old socket that goes to the outside like so, and you just kind of tap it in, just tap it in nice and flat and even all the way around with a hammer. And once you tap it in, just tap it all the way in flat and you're done. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Once that's in and flush all the way around, then I can literally just slide the axle back into place. I'll take this off. That is gonna be my spare in case I ever need it. This other size is a bigger size, and this size will fit the 9904 style that I've got on the Mach 1 over there. So then this literally is a bolt and a fair. You just slide it in, bolt it up, and away you go. That's all it is to it. It's even all the way around, pushed in. The trick is just take your time, make sure it goes in even. A socket, like I say, helps a lot. It's all the way down. And the biggest thing is even this lip, top and bottom, all the way around. Now I can put my axle in, make sure there's no debris left in here, all nice and clean. Now we got the tooth engagement lined up. Now center, just kind of tapping it in. Now I did put a little bit of lube around the O-ring. I did put a little around the axle. Everything went in real nice. So I just got to tap it in a little bit. So for that, take this. Just tap it in. Just tap, tap, tap it in. All right, so now we got the axle pushed in. We take our bracket, goes down like this. Feed our studs through, top and bottom. Then we have this piece which goes in from the bottom. Feed it around, lock it up. You see that? I have to manipulate a little bit. And you want it pretty flush right here. Then you have the nuts, if I can find them. Yep, right here. You want to put those on like so. There's 4 of these all the way around. And then we'll tighten these up. And this is basically the axle retention bracket, and it doubles as the brake caliper bracket. All right, next thing up is you put your rotor on. Always put a lug nut on it here to hold it tight. Then you put your brake caliper on. There's 2 bolts on the back, and like I say, there's a spacer because you got to space it just right with your gap between the rotor and this little slot here where it slides in between. If it's too tight, it will drag. So I already had the spacers in there, what I needed. They go between the bracket and the back of this ear that we just put on the axle. So you tighten that up. And now the next part is basically we got to put our brake pads on here, and then we'll pull the caliper up and stick it in place. So I'll go ahead and slap the pads in it, put the caliper in place, put the bolts in to hold the caliper, take the lug nut off, then we can put the wheel on it and it'll be good to go. And that's what it looks like. Brake caliper installed with the pads. You ready to put the wheel back on. And the only thing left to do is do a test drive. Feels a little laggy compared to the Mach 1. Doesn't quite have that instant torque the Mach 1 does. and pinion have been noisy for a couple years. Figured all that beating and banging this thing's taking, probably wouldn't be bad to check the backlash on it at some point. Probably wouldn't hurt also to change the ring and pinion from the 327 to something else. With this stick shift, I could probably get away going back to a 355 or even a 373, but once it comes